Well, faith-based leaders will come together next year to look into the commercialization of religion and the abuse of people's belief systems. Last year, a CRL Rights Commission report detailed the exploitation and abuse of people in the name of religion. It suggested a peer review mechanism to deal with some of those challenges. ENCA's Yanke Tolmei has been tracking the story and joins me now. Good evening, Yanke. Thanks very much for coming through. Now, you have these, faith-based organizations, in fact, their leaders particularly, coming together and saying, look, we could have or should have, spoken much earlier. But as I was sort of watching them, I was then thinking, but these are not the people who were getting people to eat snakes and drink petrol, spraying them with doom.
Yes, it is quite interesting. And also to remember that even some of these leaders themselves, there was some pushback against that report from the CRL Rights Commission last year, and that they even, at some point, the Commission considered going to the Constitutional Court to test the limits of freedom of religion. But now it seems like Parliament and the religious groups have come together, and now their relationship is even better, because they did mention that it was kind of a rocky start at the beginning, but now they've decided to work together, starting with that summit taking place next year. But obviously those groups or the leaders that were there, they don't represent all of the people, even though they said there are millions of people represented by these specific leaders. But those where who we've seen are those who make, for example, people eat grass or snakes or spray doom in people's faces.
In fact, those ones are not repentant at all.
Exactly, and they weren't there today. But what the thing is, at this summit, they hope to kind of get a legal or constitutional framework in place. They hope to focus on a code of conduct and then develop an accountability system for the religious sector. And they say when that is in place, then they will be able to act when they do hear of other church leaders who do things that amounts to abuse of people, exploitation of people, going as far as sexual abuse, and which is something that's harmful to these people. And that will also enable people, if you do go to a church and even you see that something might be off, or you have a concern about the church or the leader, the system will also be able to empower people to raise concerns, because there will be a system in place, not necessarily to regulate the sector, but to monitor it and to ensure that there is accountability if it's necessary.
So, among the groups, or the church groups that were there was what, the ZCC, the Schemberg group,
yes.
Also the South African Council of Churches.
The CRL commissions, various other pastors, the Freedom of Religion SA were in the Constitutional Court yesterday, groups from the Muslim religion as well. So it's pretty representative. We've heard from the CRL Commission, according to them, this is as inclusive as it's going to get. Obviously not those self-proclaimed pastors or those who are standalone pastors who are not necessarily part of this group, but getting this the framework in place will enable them to act against those.
The South African Council of Churches, how do I believe those are among the groups you spoke to, how do they see this process sort of panning out?
Well, what was clear from most of the religious groups is that they said that they're completely embarrassed about what has been done in the name of religion, especially for the Christian religion. They're saying that they deeply regret that it's taken this long, maybe just to speak up, the fact that they pushed against it immediately. So we heard from the SACC, I have a clip here, about just explaining that they do understand that we have to draw a line at some point.
We have to draw the line. There has to be a point at which you say, thus far and no further. And that's what these conversations are about. Where do we draw the line? How do we draw the line? What happens when you skip the line? We apologize. We can never apologize enough for how long it has taken for us to get to where we are in this conversation.
those who seemed to have lost it. But it got a great deal of pushback, as you were saying earlier, even from some of the moderate leaders of the Christian church in particular, but of course those who are in the sort of extremes. I'm talking here about those who were getting people to eat snakes and drink petrol. How do they see this unfolding? In other words, leading to this summit that's going to be held in the new year, and of course the legislative process that Parliament is going to follow thereafter.
Well, what the Commission's made clear today is the fact that they're not leading this summit or this process at all, because I think that was where a lot of the pushback was coming from, because the religious sector didn't want to be regulated or led or policed almost by the Commission. But they are using the report from the Commission as a basis for this summit, saying that they're going into the summit with the support of the Commission. Obviously, they said that they did their own investigation. They made findings that basically embarrassed a lot of the religious groups, and therefore the relationship is now better and we can now work forward. But as you'll hear from the clip here, they do stand their ground, saying that they do believe there needs to be a peer review mechanism in place, because people can't run around and do what they want to do in the name of religion.
So
I think our recommendations were very clear. There must be a peer review mechanism. We're still there, and this is the beginning of the peer review mechanism. We're still going there. And this peer review mechanism will be driven by this group and the extra people who will be coming in on the 13th of February 2019. We are on course. That's the first issue. The second issue is there are always people out there who are crying freedom of religion, and that this will upset freedom of religion. We're still convinced that as a nation we have a right to know who is doing what where. We need to know which religious leader is operating where.
Okay, CRL chairperson there, of course, speaking at that briefing that Yanke attended a little earlier on. A legislative process is going to be followed. The Portfolio Committee on Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs will, of course, be piloting legislation through Parliament, but before then there's going to be that summit that Yanke was talking about, which we are told, or at least from what we're able to glean from that media briefing, there is a buy-in from at least a significant portion of the religious community. Bianca, thanks very much for coming through.